Hi, this is Daniel Dashnaw, a marriage and family therapist, with a special guest today, Dr. Linda Metcalf. Dr. Metcalf is well known in the field of marriage and family therapy. She's a past president of AAMFT. She's authored more than 10 books, including an intriguing book on solution focused narrative therapy. Now, as you all know by now, at my podcast, Better Relationships Through Research, I'm looking for some of the most cutting edge and most interesting thought leaders to discuss how we can live better lives and build better relationships. Solution focused brief therapy and narrative therapy done by Dr. Linda Metcalf creates a strength based, story shifting model that meets clients exactly where they are. Whether she's working with children, couples, educators, or clinicians, Linda empowers people to reauthor their lives by noticing what's already working and trying to build from there. Linda, welcome. You're a hero of mine. It's such a delight to meet you.
Oh, thank you so much. What a nice compliment. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be
Thank you
here
so
and
much.
share my
Unlike a
ideas
lot of
with you.
thought leaders who tend to sort of hyper focused on one model, you've been a thought leader in both solution focused brief therapy and narrative therapy. Can you tell me the story of when the idea of combining these models sort of came upon you?
I really can, and I love telling this story. I was actually in graduate school for my doctorate, and I had just come back from watching Jay Haley when he was still alive work in his Rockville, Maryland studio, and I had waited and had saved up, and I went up there for a week, and I was just enamored with strategic family therapy. I loved the creativity of it. I thought, oh wow, this is so quick how you can change up the system. And then I came back to class the following week, literally, and my teacher held up two books. And one book was In Search of Solutions by Bill O'Hanlon and Michelle Weiner Davis. And the other book was Narrative Means to Therapeutic Ends by Michael White and David Epstein. And I remember him saying, both of these books are just cutting edge, and particularly the narrative book, he said, has some of the most elegant questions he'd ever heard. Well, here I was still excited about strategic, and then I started reading the books, and I read them together at the same time. And In Search of Solutions, much easier read, much easier. And then Narrative Means Therapeutic, much more difficult as far as incredible language. But if you weren't careful, you had to have a lot of strong coffee to get through the chapters because Michael White
Mm.
was a prolific writer, beautiful, beautiful man, a friend of mine. And I started noticing that even though I was very interested in solution focused work and felt I was, quote, a purist back then, eventually some of my students said, Dr. Metcalf, you realize you're using some externalizing in your work. I said, yeah, it seems to work. And so years go by, and I'm realizing more and more that I'm using both models together. And then around 2015, I thought, I wonder how they'd work together if I was really more focused on doing that, and decided to put the two models together. And I remember the day when I started writing, because when I write a book, I've got to have a title and I stick with the title. I don't change it. And I remember on my computer putting a solution focused guide to narrative therapy. And I thought, no, how about a narrative approach to solution focused therapy? And I thought, oh, heck, it's solution focused narrative therapy. And I thought, oh gosh, what's going to be the backlash from this? And that's how it became. And that's
Wow.
how it
Wow.
started.
I understand what you mean by backlash because even though the common factors folks tell us that a model is only 15% of outcome, they tend to be
Yes.
very sensitive around the notion of possession of ideas. I remember thinking to myself about the quibble between uh, um, externalization as it was used in solution focus versus another model. I thought to myself, weren't child therapists using this back in the 50s with little kids, externalizing things back then? Didn't they sort of, it reminded me of what Steve Jobs said about shoplifting from Xerox, some of his best ideas. But so that's fascinating. And that makes so much sense to me around that. Can you tell me a little bit more about um, how they blend. Like, let me drill down into my question a bit more. I do a lot of work with the neurodivergent, and one of the differences between
Mhm.
a neurodivergent folks and neuronormative folks is neuronormative folks are very narratively driven, but folks who are neurodivergent tend to be more informationally driven or data driven in a way. And a recent
Mhm.
study showed that solution focused therapy, brief therapy, was working exceedingly well with neurodivergent couples. And I wanted to talk
Mhm.
to you about that kind of research
Mhm.
and this kind of blend. Can you see a therapist oscillating with a neurodivergent couple, for example, between narrative work with one partner or more sort of data driven, sort of concrete ideas with another?
I think you could absolutely, I think you could. I think what's brilliant about the models, both models separately as well as together, is that there is not a therapist saying, "Oh, this is what you're thinking," or "Let me suggest this to you." No. So the neurodivergent client has the opportunity, if he or she is so specific and wanting it very concrete, to tell you preferred future and exactly what he or she would be doing in the preferred future. Whereas your neural normal, as you're referring to that person, may say, "But on that day, I would notice things that would feel so much better." So, really, tell me about those feelings. I might ask that, occasionally, but what would you be believing about your partner during those days that would help you to move forward in your day in the way that you're saying you'd like it to go? So, I think that's what's lovely about this work. Postmodernism is all about fitting into the worldview of the client.
Hmm.
That's also solution-focused work. And the narrative model also is all about the discourse in your head. What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about my relationship? And as a result, that is how I spend my time and go through the various motions of my relationship. So, yes, I think it definitely
One of
works
the
with
thoughts that
both.
occurred to me when I was
Yes.
reading your book when I was in school was the notion of thickening a narrative. And I thought to myself, in working with a
Yes.
neurodivergent spouse who might be slower to emotionally process something, he might have a brilliant insight 2 or 3 days later. Um, that particular dynamic is important to recognize that the narrative thickening for the neurodivergent partner might be the awarenesses of emotional concepts that their partner is living in, while not being able to identify with them, to be able to recognize them and understand perhaps how to engage with them a little bit.
Yes, yes, and so that's where the model could come across beautifully, and when I would be working with a couple, I might say, "Imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and things were going better. What would you be noticing about your partner?" Maybe the neurodivergent client would be very, very specific on what he or she might be noticing about the partner, whereas the neuronormative partner might be looking, said, "Yeah, I would be doing that because I would be thinking about how much I cared for you,
Right.
and you would be getting me coffee, and I would think, 'Ah, she really
One,
does care for me.'" So
yeah.
actions and
One
also
of the
emotions,
questions I've
yeah.
always wanted to ask you was about cultural narratives and cultural scripts, specifically American culture. Um, could you give me some insight on how you work with that? How do you work with larger cultural concepts within a family system or a couple system with narrative and solution focused?
I usually okay. I usually I tell my students in the university whenever you've got maybe a person with, um, cultural we all have cultural influences, I mean, we can't escape that, but I might ask them, "Teach me about the way you believe about your couplehood. Teach me the way you'd like to see your family grow." I'm interested in what you want, not what I think you should be doing. And so it's always about, I need to learn. And whether that's an American culture, whether that is British culture, whether that is Australian culture or Hispanic culture, it doesn't matter. I want to step into the worldview with the client, and I've often written about it as I just travel next to them. I let them go first. I'm just the onlooker, and occasionally pointing out that, well, there's a freeway you can get things done faster if you go this way, or there's some slow streets you can go this way. But teach me, which one seems to be the one that fits you
That sounds
best.
like,
So
in part, you're also creating a shared language with the partners.
Yes, they teach me. I'm very careful, to the language that I hear from clients, I write everything down, and I ask them before I ever get some people say, "Oh my gosh, she writes things down in front of the
Yes.
client." Yes, and yes, and the way that I do that I've learned this from, again, Michael White, was that just saying to them, as we go through our time this morning, you've got some, would it be okay if I took notes because I'm fascinated by the way you see your life and the story of your life, and I promise to give you these notes when we're finished. And people really like that. And so I'm writing them down, and occasionally, if I scribble too badly, I might say at the end of a session, um, "I'd like to rewrite these in a way that would be clearer for you because you've told me so many wonderful things. Would it be okay if I waited and wrote this down and mailed you a letter?" And so that will happen. And usually the letter is composed of all the things they tell me. And, m I remember one time I was listening to Michael talk, and he said, "When you write a letter to a client, that's equal to 6 therapy sessions in the impact it has." And so I take the time, after I see a client and compose a letter and mail it
So,
to them.
I want to be clear
Yeah.
about what we're talking about. You're talking about snail mail, aren't you?
Snail mail, although on occasion since COVID, I've,
Okay,
been known to send an email with
right,
permission from the client, and also permission always asked of being able to mail it
right.
before I'll ever do that.
What
Yes,
go
I
ahead.
think the snail
Finish your thought about
yeah,
snail mail.
I think yeah, yeah, I think the snail mail is,
So do I. It's
the
most
best.
labor intensive,
I really do.
obviously, and the most ponderous.
Yes.
But it ties into something that I read recently about children retaining learning. If they are reading a physical book, they have 8 times the retention than if they're looking at a screen. And I was thinking about
Wow, really?
White's emphasis on printed matter, if you will, of mailing these letters,
Yes.
of presenting awards, or documents in ways that made the psychic realm or the psychological realm sort of concrete and tangible. I got a letter in the mail, for example, is different than I got an email.
Yes.
But I understand that you can't always, do one. But I share your
Yeah.
preference. In a more perfect world, we'd all send our clients handwritten letters every day.
Yeah, it's the same thing between, I mean, if you get a greeting card from someone and they're
Yes,
actually using cursive to write something inside that card, it's a lot more personal. And so I think, in order to make it's that personal, which is what the narrative people that influenced me encouraged me to do, was to make sure when I write a letter, it's always about, "I enjoyed meeting you today and I've learned the following about you, and I'm wondering this and I'm wondering that, and as we talked, this is what you told me, and wow, the impact it had on me and the way that you said you wanted to live your life shows me you have all the tools you need." I mean, it's very much into that kind of narrative that you write. It's encouraging, but it's not, "You can do it, you can do it." Nope, it's about, at the end, "I look forward to seeing what you do with what you told me you'd like to see happen." To where, again, that client always gets to finish that letter and go, "Wow, I said all that in the session, and she wrote that down. I
uh,
guess I do have the ability to do things." And so I'm thinking of your neurodivergent clients who could read that and see that specifically. And if I were working with a couple where one was neurodivergent, the other was neuronormative, I'd be talking about both of them in the session. I might even say, "I noticed that your wife, looked at you in a very loving way when you talked about how you first met and what she did to help to encourage you to ask her out. And then I noticed that when she talked to you about the things that you used to do for her early in your marriage, you were surprised, but you listened as if it was very important to you." Those are the kind of indirect compliments that, and I don't really mean them to be a compliment, because actually solution focused people have done away with complimenting because they thought after all those compliments, they decided that doing that made them more of an expert, and I agree with that. So
it's like a
it's,
tentative but profound
now
noticing. I'm noticing this.
yes, Yes, I noticed that about you, and then I can't wait when I work with children, for example, and we're writing down times when things have gone better in school, or if I work with a teacher and we're looking for times when their classroom was going well. I mentioned at the end, wow, I can't wait to see what you do when you do more of what you said works. I can't wait to see the difference it will make with you on a weekend when you walk away on Friday afternoon and you know that you found a way to connect with that one child you
The
were concerned
shimmering
about.
moments.
Wonder what difference that would. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 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 yeah. The narrative people call them
Yes.
sparkling moments, and the solution focused people
Yeah.
call them exceptions. Although today they like the idea of instances of success. Personally, I'm still with the exceptions. I like
Uh,
this better.
I
Describing
always
it
got
like
like
that.
sparkling moments, but somehow I changed it to shimmering in my mind. But I love talking about
That's great. Yeah.
exceptions, though. And the thing that I was kind of wonkily
Yes.
curious about is one of the things I notice is effective is if I can keep different timelines, narrative timelines in mind when I'm talking to a client. Like when I'm talking about an exception, I might be speculating on how they'll feel at some future point when they have 6 months of experience with this exception behind them, for example, or what they might decide to do
Mhm.
once they decide that this behavior no longer serves their needs. What would they come up with instead, so to speak? Uh,
I see.
I
I
worked
see.
recently with
Yeah.
a neurodivergent engineer and his wife, and his um, his exception was to go to her and say, 2 years ago, I donated $20,000 to our church. I didn't consult you. I didn't tell you it was wrong, and I'm sorry. I haven't done anything since, and I don't plan on doing anything like that again. And I thought to myself, as a therapist, I don't know where that came from. But obviously, he's speaking along different timelines at the same time. He's talking about making amends for something from the
Mhm.
past with his wife that she knew nothing about. She was a bit taken aback, but also forgave him readily, perhaps out of shock than anything else. But then he talked about, and nothing has happened since, and nothing will happen in the future. And it made me wonder, when you're blending these two models together, since both of these are rich in timelines, if you will, what advice can you give a therapist for how to use a temporal sort of spacing to manage things like exceptions and how people think about what happens along timelines, the past, the present, and what might be in the future?
When you were telling that story, Dan, I was thinking about first thing that came to my mind was, how is it he came to the conclusion it was time to tell her? What was going on in that relationship? I might have said, "Well, what's been going on in your relationship that brings you to
Well, I
be
mean,
able to
outside
tell
of
your wife
therapy
this
every
today?"
week and working on stuff in therapy, that's what he said. It was just the work in
Uh-huh,
therapy. I realized that for me, something I did that was just perfunctory from my wife's point of view could be something that she might want to know about.
uh-huh,
And I kept thinking about it and couldn't stop thinking about it. And then finally, I just told her. So he was describing an inner
uh-huh,
process
uh-huh.
that was sparked by
Yes,
some
yes,
recognition that on her side of the street, she
uh-huh,
appreciated transparency and
mhm,
openness, even in good things
mhm,
or ostensibly good things. And I think he had thought in a silo fashion secrets are about bad things. Secrets about when you're miserable or when you
I
steal
see.
something or when you do something wrong or when you cheat. When you do something good or generous or benevolent, that's not a secret. So, see, it was kind of like the way he was putting the information in his mind as opposed to the narrative of understanding this is a family gift that might require a family consultation.
Sure, sure, and I think the way that you said she responded, where she forgave him readily, would spark in me a question like, how is it that you're able to forgive your husband so readily? What is it that you know about him that tells you this was done in a way
That's
that
where I
was
went. And what she
important to
said
him?
was, it gave me hope
Awesome.
that things are changing.
Ah,
That's what she said.
oh, wow. And so and so someday when that hope continues to grow, what
Thank you
might
for
you see
that. That's
between
what
you
I'll
and your
need
husband?
next.
Yeah,
A little inadvertent
yeah.
supervision here, you know. But no, I
Oh,
appreciate that
no,
very
yeah.
much. Can you tell me more about some of the most challenging narratives that you're seeing, or hearing about, perhaps, in contemporary American culture regarding, what's showing up on the therapy couch, as it were.
Oh, I think one of my passions is working in schools and with schools, and there is tremendous challenge there in the narratives in
Oh yeah, please
schools, and
do.
that's okay to talk about. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I and currently, and I guess since the school shooting started in 1999, I've been very fascinated with the discourse in schools that I think unfortunately contributes to school violence. And so when I go and I train teachers, for example, or even school counselors sometimes, there's a wall that I have to break through a little bit. And it's so I can never ever walk into a group of educators and say, "Hi, I'm Linda Metcalf. I live, 1,000 miles away from you. I'm here today to teach you ways to get along with kids." That would be disaster, or and I used to say, "I have ways to help you help kids." I can't do that anymore. I realize that is not it, because listening to the model in my head should have been, "I have ways to share with you today that might make you love your profession again. I have ways to maybe help you love your job again and make a difference if you're interested."
Wow.
I never Yeah, I have to go in that way, and when I go in that way, I mean, if I go in and say, "This, I think I'm gonna share some ideas with you. These are just simply ideas that, might make a difference for you, so you like coming to school again, and you like seeing the kids again." In other words, aren't we all kind of like that? If something, if I am going to do something that will give me a good feeling at the end of the day or give me some joy, I'm more likely to do it with a lot of gusto rather than, here's something that's going to make a
Well,
difference for that
what
kid.
I find two
Different.
things interesting. The first, a bit disturbing, is the change of the center of gravity from the child to the teacher. That concerns me because it seems to hint at a degree of burnout and self absorption, as a cultural sort of fact for teachers. But more important than that sort of guffaw on my part is, wow, you're actually you're leading out, starting out with a nervous system intervention for the teacher. You're saying, if you
Mhm.
hang with me and bestow
Mhm.
a little attention on me, I might give you some things that might have you feeling better at the end of the day. You know,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
Fascinating. If
Exactly.
somebody had
Yeah.
asked me to guess what your approach was, I would never have understood that that's the way you have to go in right now. How long has that been the case, Linda?
I go back, I remember the first time I realized that. I was doing some programs in Iowa, and I began to suggest that teachers began to you know tell me how they wanted things to go for them in the classroom, and I was coming back with, "Wow, I wonder what your kids would think if you began to share with them this is how you'd like it to go in the classroom." And that was teetering on a teacher actually being human and talking about things like, um, students, I'm having, because I encourage teachers to do this nowadays. Teachers, I'm having a rough time this morning because things are a little out of whack here, and I'm having a hard time getting your attention. I'm your teacher, and I care for every one of you, and I have something real exciting to share with you, and it bothers me I can't. Can we do something together this morning so I can share with you some ideas about this subject?" That was just like unheard of. And so a teacher raised her hand and she said, "If I do that, I'm victimizing myself to my students." She said that in front of all these people. And I looked at her principal and I said, "Is it okay if your teachers begin to talk to kids this way?" And she said, "Please do that." And in another situation I had, in another state, I was talking about the solution focused approach with, there were probably 200 teachers in there. And I was talking about, just whenever they have a student is acting out or even cursing at them or just disengaging, I was sharing with them the idea of, let's take a 2-minute break, step out in the hallway, and you as a teacher looking at this kid who just, flipped you off, and you say, "Look, sounds like you're having a rough morning. it's really tough for me in there too. What can you and I do as we walk into the classroom again so we both get through just the rest of this class?" Well, I shared that story, and one person in the back of the room raised his hand and stood up and he said, "That's okay, but how do you know when it's time to give up on a kid?"
Wow.
He actually said that
Well,
in front of the superintendent, and I looked at him and I mean, I sometimes the questions I get, I have to think on the spot, and it's like, "Oh, what I'd really like to say." But when I looked back and I said, "You're not gonna like my answer.
yeah,
You
yeah.
never give up on a kid. The job is
Right.
I've gotta find a
One
way
of the
in."
things that I did recently is I was one of the founders of Couples Therapy Inc., and I cashed out that a couple of years ago and started a private practice. But I skipped over the whole clinic work piece. So I work 20 hours every week in a public health clinic working with autistic kids and their parents, helping them with the IEPs and whatnot. That's why I'm really interested in this topic, because when I glided into public health, I thought, oh, the schools, they want to help the kids, they love the kids, they'll be allies and all this, and it's just all public and all hunky dory. And the training I got says no, it's a knife fight in a phone booth often. There's like hard attitudinal pieces, and I find myself teaching my kids things like
Yes.
quiet menace. Instead of screaming at a teacher, say, if your voice is louder than mine, you're going to look bad. Can we start over again, please? Thank you. Okay. Because that's the level of the discourse. So what you're telling me is plugging in directly with my experience. Just I got to tell you that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I just truly feel that, I'm always trying to get the attention of those, principals and superintendents and, "Let me come share this with your people," and that's why I do a lot of free things as a result just to share the ideas of how this can make a difference, and, I truly do think if we could change the discourse in schools, we put up all the well, in one school district that recently had a terrible school shooting, they've now got bulletproof windows, barbed wire fences, more guards, and better locks. And they think that's it. That's all they need to do. But where I come from is the discourse that happens in the classroom is what is, I think, integral to making peace in schools. And getting in the door like that is hard. It really is. But when you do, incredible things happen with some of the most at-risk kids. So there's a school in Austin, Texas, that I go and visit with my school counseling students at the university where I teach at, and the name of the school is Garza High School, Gonzalo Garza High School, Austin, Texas. It is a public high school, an alternative high school for what Austin ISD called the throwaway kids, the kids that were suspended, expelled,
Most of
acted
my
out,
kids are in those
didn't seem
schools
to
in
care.
Massachusetts. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, and you're in
We
Massachusetts.
call them
My
MAP
son lives in
schools.
Boston. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
MAP schools. Okay, okay. So they had a wonderful lady named Cynthia Franklin who was working at University of Texas at Austin, and she had written some solution-focused books, and I talked with her a lot, about schools and things, and so she went in when they were creating this throwaway school, an alternative school, and they made it a complete solution-focused school where everyone, including the janitor and cafeteria workers, were trained in the solution-focused approach. And she's written so many articles on and researched it. And so as a result, this book, this school, which is you have to be at least a sophomore in high school in order to apply to go. They rarely turn anyone down
Mhm.
unless they have a very violent past. And I think that's only been like two people in 15 years. Um, everybody is trained. Teachers are trained in solution-focused approach. If a kid comes in and says, "I can't do algebra. I'm just stupid," the teacher's more likely to say, "Hey, no, it's just that I, your teacher, haven't learned how to teach you yet. Teach me how you need to learn this." And 80% of the kids are at risk. 80% of the kids graduate. There are no
Wow.
discipline
That's
issues.
amazing. Yeah, it's completely different.
0.
I remember reading research because I was concerned about understanding school shooting, especially when I started work in public health. One of the things I endured was this is what you do if somebody comes in and starts shooting. So I realized, okay, like I can no longer like see this as an intellectual issue. It's like a real social issue. And what I read was is that the families have a relationship with firearms where it's socially and emotionally reinforcing. Like the old John Lennon lyric, "Happiness is a warm gun." There's some sort of emotional relationship with a deadly weapon, and is that what you found as well? And how does the school piece, if that is true, make that more difficult to deal with?
I where I come from, Dan, with this topic is that, what is it that pushes a kid to pick up a gun and go think this is the way to fix it? So possibly, possibly that, but I think it's bigger than that. I think if you're a kid and even though you've got guns in your house, and you walk into a school one morning after you've maybe watched your brother get arrested by the police the night before and dad's hit mom or all kinds of things, and you walk in and you haven't slept and you haven't done your homework and you sit in a classroom and the teacher walks over to you, let's just say my dream would be, and says, "Hey, looks like you're having a tough morning. What can I do as your teacher to help?" And the kid looks up at the teacher and grumbles, and you leave him alone. But then you come back later and say, "I'm still here for you." Contrast that with a kid who walks in the classroom, hasn't slept the night before, sits down, teacher screams at him, "Well, you're not any good either, just like your brother." That's the difference, I think. I'm leaning up obviously towards the engagement side. So even if they do have that, relationship and the family has firearms, sure, there's something that pushes them to think. I mean, what's going on at a school that would make somebody go in, like the kids did at Columbine, and just start shooting and laughing about it? If you read, reading the book called Columbine. Those two kids, one very much a sociopath, the other terrible home life. Parents were overlooking the fact they were building bombs in their bedroom. But still, you look into their minds, and the book does that, about the social rejection they were having, not just from kids, but from
Yeah,
teachers too. So true. Yeah, I truly
right.
think, I mean, this is a huge beast you go and conquer, but I think we definitely need
My,
to
my,
rewind and
my
come
first
back
thing on
with a
reading that
different
research
path.
was it sounded like somebody in New England would come up with to explain what was happening in Texas by indicting a culture.
Sure.
Um, but I can understand how, because I always thought there was a piece that was missing there, and you just explained the other piece to me, which is I'm coming to a difficult but more accurate awareness of what triggers a lack of bestowed attention, a lack of adult curiosity that's benevolent, is what you seem to be describing.
Yes.
And I didn't
Yes.
realize how argumentative, perhaps is a diplomatic word, that the discourse is between students and teachers until I worked in public health and was helping kids shape their side of the argument. And I was frankly appalled and shocked
Uh-huh.
at the level of like burnout and stress
Oh, I know.
that's being dealt with, and the very lack of bestowed attention. One of my kids, the problem was he was being sent constantly to the principal's office because the teacher didn't know how to deal with him, and I had to give him he had to trust me
Right.
enough to say, if you try it this way, you'll make trouble for the teacher because you won't be conforming with the script that she has in her head. And that was the notion of being very polite but firm, defending his IAP privileges. Like if he gets stressed, he needs a 3-minute walk. And he was often being denied that. This basic issues like that. What he started to see, the shift in attention, that he wasn't a designated problem anymore. He literally brightened and bloomed
Yeah.
as a human being.
That's beautiful. I mean, it's so heartwarming for me to hear that you've done something like that with a
But
kid
now
like
I
that.
can do
And
better having talked to
one of
you,
my
though, about understanding the other piece of it as well, which is uh, 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 the advocacy has to be multi-directional. Uh,
It does, and you and I are again, you and I are marriage and family therapists, and one to me, that's one of the best assets I have going into a school, which is quite a system. And what I learned when I had kids like you're talking about, and I'd see, I mean, Alan McAvoy, the guy that I studied when I did my TED talk on this, and I talked to him personally. It was fascinating to talk to him. Talks about teacher bullying and they're not realizing that's what they're doing with this, what they're doing, and just being able to talk to a kid, even if a teacher, even though I'll try my best as a school counselor to appease the teacher and say, hey, I'm interested in helping you have the class you want. That still may not make it. So talking to the kid then who's going back to that teacher, I like saying, in my office, you seem like you're such a kind young person. I liked you came in, you mentioned something about my Mickey Mouse on my bookshelf and stuff, and you think that's funny and silly. And so I wonder who you are really that the teacher doesn't notice yet. And
yes.
that's a narrative piece. And and they'll say, "Well, I don't know. Well, I'm really alright." I said, "Well, tell me about who you are," that she has no idea. And so I get the kid to tell me who else they are, and I'm going, "Wow." I wonder what would happen if you walked back in and showed her just a
I
snippet of that
sometimes ask
person's story.
the
I
boys I
want
work with, well, what's your code? You know, how do you
That
walk
is
your path?
great.
What's
That
your
is
code?
great.
I'm like when you're with your
Yeah,
friends, what
yeah.
are the common areas of shared values and beliefs that you have about how you guys should be together? But that's
Oh,
that's
love
that's
that, love
such
that.
an interesting a dialogue about who are you, what is the part of you that the teachers do not see. It's a very
That's it.
compelling
That's
argument.
it.
Um,
And what I've also found is after we have that conversation like you just mentioned, the worst thing I can do is just send them back to class. Absolute worst. So what I learned to do as a school counselor with the MFT background was I walk them back to class, always. And I teach my school counselors, do not send them back because you send them back to the class with the teacher who's unknowing of what you've just talked with the kid about. They're going to pull them right back into the same systemic struggle. And so that's why they have the repeat offenders there all the time. And so I walk them back to class, no matter what age they are, whether they're 17 or 6, and say to the knock on the door. Elementary school teachers come out and say, "Oh, good to see you." Secondary teachers come out and said, "I'm busy." But either way, I said, "Thank you for sending Johnny to me. He and I have talked. He's come up with some ideas where he wants to show you a different side of him today. Would you just watch? That's all. Because I want you, Miss Johnson, to have a good class today too. I work for you as much as I do for him. And I've noticed it paid me back doing that kind of thing, that that gives the kid a chance. Other than that, it's coming back into the same. They don't want them back in the classroom. They glare at them to sit down and don't try anything, or else
yeah.
you'll be going right back. And that does nothing but ignite it again. So yeah, it's quite but it's a
How do
passion
we
of
get
mine. I love
more
it.
mental health awareness of best practices into schools? I mean, there's only one Linda Metcalf walking the earth right now, unfortunately. But how do we create a culture of this
Yeah,
kind of cure? I always thought it was fascinating that American therapy culture, everybody knows about couples therapy. We make TV shows about it. But family therapy, which is where it all came from, is like a poor stepchild to couples therapy. And yet we have
yeah,
more need for
yeah.
applied family therapy in our schools and our institutions. And yet there's very little of it to be actually be found.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, if you look into teacher, prep programs right now, they're learning the same things basically that I did in 1974. And so the kids are not being, I mean, you can only punish and reward so much, and the kids today don't care. What they really want is
Yes.
connection from you. And 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 our poor teachers don't have the skills to know how to do that. So it's, what do you do? I mean, it's interesting because every year I do an online conference. I've done that since 2020 when COVID first came along. And one year I had some wonderful people from South Africa who had
Mhm.
also a solution focused school there. And one of the presenters was a principal, a solution focused
Mhm.
principal. And he was fantastic. And I asked him when we were talking, I said, okay, you got all your teachers to do solution focused counseling or solution focused approach in their classrooms. So, how did you convince them to do that? And he looked at me and he said, Linda, I had to say, you're going to do this. And so when you asked me, Dan, how do you change a culture? I'm afraid it has to be a little bit more of, I mean, you think about how do we change, first thing that I think about is how do we change the culture from, using mimeographic machines to Xerox copiers? How do we go from not having computers to
Mhm.
having computerized everything? And did we like it at first?
Right.
No, we didn't like it because we had to do something different. So, but we had to do it. It was mandated. And the schools that I've seen where, and I did some work in Iowa for a long time with schools that wanted to do that. Teachers were told, this is what we're doing. And Linda's going to teach you how to do it. And she's going to come watch you and help you do it. And principals would tell their teachers, before you send a kid to me, you have to have a solution focused
I'm so relieved
conversation
to
with the
hear you
student.
say that because I was trying to, before you went there, connect two troubling ideas of what you just said. One was that when you speak to teachers, you speak from their perspective and regulate their nervous system. And you also said, as a protocol to a kid who is grumpy, to bestow attention multiple times. Those two ideas seemed contradictory until we introduced the third force here, which is culture change by mandate. Like, this is how we're going to be doing
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, it's
Right.
the educator's language. I mean, we know. I mean, we have to do those things. They there's this thing in Texas where, we quote teach to the test. Personally, I think there's what's wrong with teaching to the
Right.
test as long as you're teaching something. If the teacher
Yeah.
I've never understood the worry about that.
Yeah.
And I don't think you have to talk about it. Just know what's on the test and arrange your lesson plans accordingly and
I
help
don't know
kids
about you,
to
but
learn,
I
period.
don't use algebra most days of the week. No, I understand that completely, but
Yeah,
there's also what I love about what you're saying here is that um, it's multiple points of pressure. There's the collaborative exhortation of try this, you might feel better, along the lines of do this, your job depends on it because I said so. And maybe it'll be like
yes.
multiple sources of pressure that they'll coerce us. I was reading about the latest statistics on young mental health in the United States. It was absolutely frightening. I know they were attributing this to COVID and some of the other sort of developmental setbacks
Right.
that we had. But when we look at everything we're talking about against a backdrop of declining youth mental health, I kind of say, okay, coercion, bring it on. It's like let's try to approach
Mhm.
this from as many ways as possible. I know that as a person who works part time in a mental health clinic, I show up for IEP meetings, as an advocate. And like I said, I'm not seeing at all the impression that I was expecting to see. You know, I,
What are you
I
saying?
see
What
a
are you
lot
saying
of
instead?
prevarication. We can't do that. Well, I know you can because let me pull out this other IEP here. See this? You did it already, right? What happened to that guy? Like things like that, just laziness,
Yeah.
a lack of engagement.
Yeah.
I want to apologize to all the teachers who might be listening because we're talking about a burnout within a system. We're not talking about personality defects. I want to make that clear. But the system isn't working for everybody, it seems.
Well, it's very problem focused. I mean, in the IEP meeting, I doubt you heard people talk
Right.
about his competencies. You probably heard about all the testing and all the scores and how low they were, and there's no hope. And so if I'm a kid and I'm sitting in there hearing this or a parent, you can imagine the discourse that's being
Yeah.
created in my head. So, when I go when I go into IEPs, and actually I go into when I was in practice still, I have kids come to my practice who were struggling in school. The first session I had was in my office. The second one was on campus. And I would go in and start and would request, with parent permission, of course, to meet with all the teachers of the student. And that was, I always had to meet with them separately first, as a group, and not have the student present, because I don't know what I was walking into. But I would go in and not ask anything about the problem, but I did go in, and the first thing I would ask was, what are your best hopes for this young person? That's it. And you hear a lot of complaints sometimes, but say, okay, and thank you for giving me that. Suppose we walk out of here in 30 minutes and we have some ideas to help him. What might we talk about that would tell us he has abilities? And once we've done that, once we've talked about the abilities some people have seen, and I have to go sometimes and say,
Yeah.
even on a tiny
Exception
scale,
on
I'm
occasion.
writing on, yeah,
Yeah.
and then I'll go get the kid. The kid will come in and sit next to me. And usually the kids are like starstruck. They
Mm.
don't want to know what to do with this. And then I say to them, I'd like to share with you what your teachers have said about you. And then I read back the things that they say that
Right.
the child is competent in, just a little bit. And I look at the kids and say, what's it like for you? They look at me like, no, they're speechless, which is awesome. And then we move on into, suppose we leave here, teachers and student, and things go better just for today. What do you think you all will begin to do to bring out more of Johnny's competencies? And Johnny hears this. I mean, I can honestly tell you, Dan, doing that for the years that I did that, hardly ever did I have to
Wow.
see that kid again, because the teachers would take over. And you talk about new climate, it creates
Wow.
a new climate.
I guess praise
And
isn't just for the
yeah.
Lord, is it?
Well, and
No,
it's not
it's
even
not.
praise.
It's an
It's not even
assessment
praise.
of
No.
potential, but probably feels like
Yes.
praise, I would imagine.
It feels like, to a kid, it feels
Yes,
like they like
I'm
me.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm okay. They like me. I'm not
probably the most
worthless
vital
like they say
emotion
I
a
am.
child, should be able to marinate in while his brain and nervous system or her brain and nervous system develop. Wow, that's
Sure.
that's that's quite a
Yeah.
narrative. You hardly ever see them again, or never see them again, if they're sitting in a room and they're hearing a teacher describe, a fair assessment of their potential of abilities that they perhaps have evidenced on occasion or never.
Or never. A lot of them never. And to hear that, I'll ask them. Well, I asked one kid this, who actually was having a trouble with school refusal,
Yeah.
and we did the meeting, and the day of the meeting, I had to go help, mom get him out of the car. He didn't wanna come in. And, at the end, I said, "What was it like for you?" He said, "I never had a meeting like that before. That was
It seems that
something."
everybody
Yeah.
encounters you and leaves with an improved nervous system. Well,
I hope
I
so.
hope so too. That's why we do what we do. Linda, I so enjoy talking to you. Is there
Yeah.
anything else you want to say to my audience about, what we've been talking about? Any last thoughts you want to leave with them?
Just, if you like the ideas of, solution focused, and you've and narrative therapy, do consider, having them join hand in hand, particularly with kids or adults or couples or families that seem a little bit resistant. DeShazer always said, "No such thing as resistance, only a
Exactly.
flexible therapist." And yeah, and the narrative approach can really help you, when a person, and we didn't talk about that much, but when a person is very stuck in a problem, and not ready to tell you best hopes, the narrative can really give you a way of joining with that person to where eventually they will be ready to step out
One
of
of the
that
things
story
that
into
I
a
do
new
with
one.
my kids, because many of them watch sci-fi, is I talk about parallel universes where different things are happening, but and other things might be the same. And to see
Yes.
the reaction to, which is just another iteration of the miracle question again, just updated perhaps, a little bit.
Sure.
Right. Can you tell
Lovely.
my audience where they
Lovely
can like
ideas.
learn more about you, contact you, your website?
Yes, I have a website, and the website is titled Solution Focused Schools Unlimited. And on that website are lots of free resources. I do professional developments a lot. I do, when school is on, since COVID, every other Wednesday for the past, we're going on 5 years now, I do a free session on a Wednesday at noon Central Time called Solution Focused Connection, where I just pick various topics that are requested and create a PowerPoint, and we have a discussion for an hour, and you get one free CEU. It's offered throughout the school year. And also, you can sign up for something that I call Monday Ideas, which is just kind of an uplifting little blurb for Monday morning. If you sign up every Monday morning, it will be in your mailbox for the whole school year and just give you something to think about as a school counselor or a teacher. So it's
Excellent.
out there.
Dr. Linda Metcalf, thank you so much for sitting with me today and chatting. I really enjoyed our.
Thank you. I love your questions and I love what you do, Dan. Thank you for doing what you do.